Because of the Commission on Presidential Debates, it is really difficult for third-party candidates to qualify for the national debates because they have to reach 15% in public opinion polls, and not just one poll, but 5 different polls. The problem with that is when it comes to polling, the methodology is everything. Even if your wording is just slightly off, you could dramatically alter the results of the entire poll. Hence why we can't really trust a single poll, and we have to take aggregate polling results into consideration. Now, at this point, Jill Stein has reached 7% in some polls, but on average, she's probably about 3 to 5%. Gary Johnson has reached 10% and above in some polls, hasn't yet hit 15%. But with how much people dislike Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, we have 80% of both Hillary and Donald Trump voters saying they're voting for their candidate, not because they prefer them more, but because they're voting against their opponent. Well, you have to question, why is it that it's so difficult for Gary Johnson and Jill Stein to reach 15% in the polls? Shouldn't they both be at 15% together? I mean, that's 30%. Well, it's weird, right? Well, part of that may have something to do with the methodology of the polls that are actually biasing the results in favor of Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. So Sam Husseini, founder of VotePack.org, penned an article for Huffington Post explaining the Bipartisan Commission on Presidential Debates announced what polls it will utilize in excluding candidates from its debates. The CPD says candidates like the Libertarian Party's Gary Johnson and the Green Party's Jill Stein must get 15% in polls conducted by 5 national public polling organizations: ABC/Washington Post, CBS/New York Times, CNN/Opinion Research Corporation, Fox News, and NBC/Wall Street Journal. Not only, as several have correctly argued, is the 15% threshold arbitrary and exclusionary, but these polls don't actually ask voter preferences at all. So seemingly, not asking a voter who they prefer, it seems like a relatively benign omission, right? As long as you're asking them who they're voting for, then that should be fine, right? Well, no, because who you're voting for and who you prefer are 2 entirely different questions, because if you ask many people who they actually prefer between Hillary Clinton and Jill Stein, for example, many of them will say they prefer Jill Stein, but if you ask them who they're voting for, they'll say they're voting for Hillary Clinton strategically just so that way they can defeat Donald Trump. So those are entirely different questions, and if you based who can qualify for the national debates exclusively on the question of who you prefer more, well, Gary Johnson and Jill Stein would probably get in easily. So he continues, they all ask, if the presidential election were being held today, for whom would you vote? Or some minor variation of that. A better public opinion question would be, who do you want to be president, or who do you prefer to be president, or who is your first choice to be president? By contrast, the question that the CPD relies on from these media organizations, if held today, who would you vote for, is a tactical question. As has become increasingly clear, there are many people who would like Gary Johnson or Jill Stein to be president. However, many who fear Trump or Clinton are currently planning on voting for Clinton or Trump. So again, 80% are voting against a candidate, not for a candidate, when they are supporting Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump at the polls. So if you ask who they prefer, that's going to change the poll dramatically. And we've all heard this argument. I love Jill Stein, but she can never win, so I'm going to have to vote for Hillary Clinton because I think she has the best chance at beating Donald Trump, and I care more about voting against Donald Trump and defeating him than I do about voting against Hillary Clinton. We've heard that, right? Well, that person literally prefers Jill Stein over Hillary Clinton. See the problem there? These polls are not helping third-party candidates. They are disproportionately helping the 2 mainstream political candidates, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. That's a huge problem. So think about how problematic this is. The polls that the CPD chose to determine who can and cannot be included in debates is phrased in a way to diminish the prospects that Jill Stein or Gary Johnson's name will come out of voters' mouths. Now, regardless if this bias is intentional or not, which, of course, it's intentional, this is still a systematic error. The whole poll is flawed. Husseini argues, our voting system puts voters in a bind, making it difficult for them to vote their true preference, but public opinion polling should be a relief from that. Such polling should find out what the public thinks and wants, especially if the electoral system doesn't allow for those choices, but that's not what's happening. The tracking poll question that's being used over and over and obsessed over by all these organizations is actually disguising public opinion, and then the CPD, acting on behalf of the two major parties, is using that to exclude their third-party candidates from debates, further marginalizing any public thinking that questions the establishment parties. Now, the Republican senator who is the director of the CPD was asked whether or not he would change the debate eligibility requirement by asking voters who they prefer or who they would like to see in the debates, for example, rather than just asking who they're going to vote for. And this was his response. The issue is, who do you want to be president? It's not who do you want to do a dress rehearsal and see who can be the cutest at the debate. So there you have it. It is complete and utterly arbitrary. And the two major parties, surprise, surprise, are trying to make it so that way no dialogue is furthered in this country. It's either them or the highway. Well, I say to hell with that. And look, Kyle Kulinski of Secular Talk, shout out to him, phenomenal YouTuber, phenomenal political commentator. He proposed this plan. He said, let's put pressure on the CPD, and if they're not going to change, we're going to force them to change. And I also want to sign on to that plan. So if you want to force the CPD to include Gary Johnson and Jill Stein in the debates and like this idea, here's what we do. We contact the CPD. You could email comments@debates.org. And the president of the CPD can be reached at president@nd.edu, or knowing that all of our emails will just go directly into their junk mail folder, we can hit them where it really hurts. We can email their advertisers. So what you can do is you can contact their sponsors and demand that they pull out of the debates unless they want to be boycotted. So what I'll do is I will include a link down below in the description box, which will have all the email addresses and phone numbers of people at the CPD, as well as sponsors of these debates. So if we make enough noise, if we put enough pressure on them, we can potentially make a difference. So look, it's time that if we're not going to get electoral reform, we're at least going to get these third-party candidates into the debates. So we have to fight like hell, demand that Jill Stein and Gary Johnson, even if you only support one of those two, we need them both in the debates. Because if only one of them gets in, then the complaint is going to be that they're a spoiler. So if you have a spoiler on both sides, that removes that option. That removes that criticism and complaint. So let's get them both in the debates, because that's the right thing to do.